I set up Beyond 15 years ago, and at the time I'd done lots and lots of work in events. I'd then gone on to be a marketing manager. I'd set up a marketing department for a law firm. It was based in the US, my whole team was in the US, but I was based on my own in London, reporting to about 30 partners, all of whom had different ideas on how an event should look. So I didn't find there was that cohesion that I was used to with an agency where we all got round a table and we brainstormed. These were 30 people with completely disparate ideas of what we now call ROI objectives. So it was a really, really steep learning curve, and I didn't last long. I actually left after less than a year, and I set up Beyond. And the point about Beyond was that it was an agency not just to do project management of events, but to consult on events, because at the time, events were actually being taken away from agencies and being arranged by in-house staff, many of whom actually weren't doing this as a day job. They were doing it on top of their day job. So Beyond, we still do projects. We do lots of big projects, but we also consult from conception to delivery, training, or coming up with strategic ideas for planning event programs, for you to put on events with less stress, with less effort, with more tools, and easier when it's on top of your day job.
So you all know then that events mean different things to different people. And a lot of your job is to manage those expectations. So really, we're looking in that kick-off meeting essentially to break it down of what needs to be communicated for the business, for the success of the business, for that event.
Really clearly set of what you need to achieve, both creatively, strategically, and to fit your budget. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to go off on a tangent and come up with these really brilliant ideas which you have no way of satisfying because you've not got something to back them up.
We always ask our clients what do they want to achieve from the event. And there's quite often, depending on how many people are in the kick-off meeting, there's quite often lots of different, sometimes competing objectives. So part of that meeting is to really whittle that down into one or two, actually we sometimes say maximum of 3 key, clear objectives, just for the purely simple purpose of not diluting the message of that event.
Then you stand a much better chance of actually then being able to say you've succeeded and you've made those objectives. If you have too many, then you're just not only diluting the purpose, but you're also setting yourselves up for not quite getting there. And
in our experience, we do get to those objectives in the kick-off meeting, and we'll touch on this a little bit later on, but during the course of the event planning process, you get other important people sort of feeding in with their take on what the event should be.
Be assertive. You guys are the ones who oversee all of this. And you guys are the ones who know whether it is realistically going to work or not. And as much as you're told, particularly agency side, my bosses always used to say, you know, never say no to a client. But actually, there are times you need to say no. So you might need to do it incredibly diplomatically. But be really assertive. If you know something is either going to work or not work, then say it up front. Because your bosses won't have any idea of the impact of this kind of stuff. You know, they're going, an 80-piece orchestra is really impactful. Everybody's going to get there. It's going to sound fantastic. They're not thinking, oh, but the catering's got to come through that access door and the sound has got to do their sound check. They don't have any of those things to worry about. All they're thinking about is the end result, whereas you've got to think about the process. So be really assertive in your communication.
ROI tends to be a bit of a buzzword in the industry. I mean, years ago, we were given huge budgets, and ROI wasn't that much of a consideration. It was great if it happened, but it wasn't necessarily the forefront of our clients' minds. Their whole objective really was to put on a great show. So like we said in the last class, agree your ROI targets, really. Much like any marketing exercise, you need to know where you want to end up in order to plan your event in its entirety. And we've sort of whittled it down to two types of ROI. There's what we call hard ROI, which is your sort of hard facts, real clear data that can be collated. Say you want to increase your attendance on your last event you did, last year's event. That's really easy to measure. And then we come into soft ROI. So this is what we tend to encounter quite a lot. It's almost the warm and fuzzy ROI, how things aren't necessarily easily quantifiable, but it might be a feeling that you want to invoke in your guests.
Or it's about how they feel about your brand, how they react to your brand, how they might talk to other people about your brand. It could be as simple as, did they have a great time? For staff events rather than client events, it could be how motivated people feel afterwards, 2 months later, 6 months later, a year later. It's much more touchy-feely and marketing-based rather than hard data-based.
Yeah, so it's really that kind of ROI tends to be more of a slow burn as well. You might not be able to get those immediate data across even within a month or so. It might take 6 months to really gather that feedback and that data. But then you get a real sense of what works in your events in order to get that feeling across in your audience. You also have to think about who will be responsible. It's not going to necessarily be you, the event planner, the event manager. It might be the sales team. It might be the marketing team.
It's very easy for a PA or for a marketing person or for an events person to feel, oh, phew, we've done it. We've pulled it off. The event was a success. Great. It's the next morning. I can now read my emails again, get on top of everything else and start the rest of my job. You know, actually, in a way, and it's a real cliche, but in a way, that event is just the beginning of it, because that's the beginning of the measurement, because it's not until after the event that you measure the success. So you need to make sure that, as Alice says, the right people have been at the event, if it's, for instance, the marketing people or the sales people who are going to be measuring attendance. But it's also things like making sure that the details are uploaded into a CRM system. You know, is that your IT team? Is that your tech team? Is that the marketing team? Who is it that's inputting all of the data in afterwards? Who is it that has put together surveys, if it's something as simple as surveys going out to employees afterwards? Make sure that is all done. Don't leave the event when the event is done. You know, make sure that follow-up is done. If the follow-up isn't done, the ROI is definitely not achieved.
And your stakeholders will then question your planning abilities because it will come back on you. So you need to be able to justify to them why you're putting these measures in place along the way. Because if you don't have them, 9 times out of 10 your event budget will probably be cut or can be completely reconfigured for next year. So ROI goes hand in hand with engaging stakeholders, because essentially what the stakeholders' aims are is growing and moving the business on. Okay, so barriers to success. Who has, kind of show of hands, who's experienced for too many cooks? Straight up, love it. The too many cooks analogy. It's one that comes up, as we've said, all the time, and it's really difficult to manage. But we always advocate just have one person to take that ownership of the event and all the event documents. So it might not just be stakeholders, it might be your colleagues as well, feeding in bits to the event process. we've managed it like that before, because we tried it, and we always like trying something, and it doesn't quite work. We were, as you know, I'm a terrible delegator. I'm an event manager. I don't want to give out all of my work to somebody else. I like to be in control, and I'm sure a lot of you feel the same. But it is really important to have one person take ownership of all the event documentation, because it takes one person to not input something on a spreadsheet or not change something when there's an update. And then you're like, who did that or who didn't do that? So we always have one sole senior event manager on each event.
Yeah, and I think you need a very, very clear system of who is doing what. So for instance, you might use something like Google Docs, whereby you can share all the documents and people can go in and they can see live changes, but you need to be really, really secure that someone is able to edit, someone is able to just look at, because as Alice says, as soon as something gets changed and the senior person is not notified, you're in utter chaos. You can have events for several hundred people over several days, or even just one small evening event can still get totally ruptured by someone inputting something and not telling someone else. And then there's this chaos of not knowing how it's happened and where it's happened and why it's happened and does the supplier know, etc., etc. So we have a really strong system in-house where there is one person always designated who gets final say on everything. And we then colour coordinate according to who is inputting and whether it's still TBC with the client. Be really, really specific and clear about who does what and who has the overall responsibility for it.
We also, like I've touched on before, we have a lot of stakeholders having very differing agendas. Let me give you a quick example of that. We recently did an event at the beginning of the year. This was the very creative kick-off meeting one with a minuscule budget. So we had a lovely meeting with the CEO, the marketing director, and their in-house events manager. And we set out really clear objectives, really clear path. It was a 2-month lead time on this event. It was very short. And we had to be really very specific in what we wanted to achieve in a very short amount of time. And we went away from that meeting feeling very clear on what we were doing, and we were left in the very capable hands. Our day-to-day contact was the marketing manager. And slowly but surely, he started to feed in slight variations on what we had agreed with the CEO. And to the point where the event actually started to look completely different. It turned out he was sort of trying to push his own agenda through this sort of first event he was overseeing. So we had to have a really diplomatic meeting with the CEO and pulling everyone together. And it was a really sensitive way of going about things. We had to be really, really careful not to offend him, but also we knew we had to stick to what we had originally agreed. So that was a really tricky situation to manage, and managing stakeholders is tricky. You have to be very, very delicate.
I think firstly, try and get those original ROI objectives discussed down on paper and into some kind of official document so that you can refer back to it, so that when someone does start on what we call brief creep, you can tell that it's happening. For us as an agency, it often means that we're using a lot more time and therefore money, which a client might not have, to go off-piste when we've quite clearly agreed a certain direction. But in this case, it was basically two people going off in quite opposite directions and them both really fighting for what they were standing for, and us stuck in the middle, sort of trying to manage both the relationship and the event. And as Alice says, we had to sort of meander quite diplomatically, and what ended up happening was a meeting between us, CEO and marketing director, where everybody could both air their thoughts, but we could also bring the whole thing back to its original state, its original objectives.
Pin down the key decision makers at intervals just to reaffirm what we're doing, get them to sign off on each critical stage. That not only helps you know that you're on the right path, but it also gives you an insurance policy along the way. You can revert back to that sign-off meeting and say, well, you signed this off, this was confirmed, I've got it in writing. Get everything in writing, guys. Do it over a coffee and then follow up with an email, because that's really key in, well, it has been for us, in showing that you can go back and show the sign-off points on each element of the event. We do a lot of streamlining communication throughout the process. We've learned over the years our own ways of doing this. So we start off quite often being told that such and such a person has no time in their diary for another month, but we need to sign off on something pretty urgently. So we schedule micro meetings.
You know, I'm sure you're all used to bosses saying, no, I can't discuss that, I don't have time in my diary, just deal with it. So you do just grab them for 5 minutes when they have 5 minutes, and actually sometimes they're more relaxed, or sit in their Uber when they're going to the next meeting, or, you know, just grab them in those few minutes, have your tick list, and as Alice says, then follow it up further to our discussion. These are the points we have discussed and confirmed. I will add those into the plan now, which is so much easier than trying to get someone for an hour for a formal meeting.
Actually, we've done plenty of events where stakeholders aren't really interested in doing these touchpoint meetings, and then wonder at the end of it why something's not here, or they thought something else would happen at this point, and at no point had they mentioned it through the entire event planning process. So it's a really simple but really key element to your project plan when you set it out at the beginning.
So you need a stakeholder that you can deal with for all of your logistical detailed questions, and you need a stakeholder who is all about the vision, and you need to work out which one you ask all the questions to. As much as you might have all sorts of platforms, internet platforms, for your to-do list as such, you want one platform which is your absolute event management Bible for the whole event.
You detail absolutely everything that needs to be done, and that will, for me, that all goes in red. So when something's in red, it means it needs to be confirmed, it needs to be sorted, it needs to be signed off. Once that's done, it goes into grey. So I know it's done, I don't need to address it anymore, and whoever else is looking at EventLAB, if we're having our touch point meetings with our stakeholders, they can see really clearly what has been confirmed and what hasn't been confirmed. And I always put the initials of the person that needs to confirm it next to the job, so they can see what they need to do as well. So it's all right sharing this document, but me being a sole event manager, I will generally be the one that edits it and controls its contents. So it starts off about a mile long, but as you confirm things, it becomes shorter and shorter and shorter, and then that becomes your event schedule for on the day. So it actually becomes a really useful two-in-one document. All the floor plans go in there, all the AV details go in there, the AV spec, absolutely everything you could think of.
The event manager on the day can go into that document and they have absolutely every single thing, rather than 10 sets of documents, one with the contact details, one with the AV, one with the catering, you know. So instead of going through lots of different documents to find things, you've literally just got the whole darn lot in one. The important thing is that you have a system. Because events are so kind of chicken and egg, you might have got your sign-off from your CEO, but you haven't yet confirmed it with the venue. So you've still got that in-between stage, which needs to be marked on your plan.
And we find that our stakeholders really appreciate it. The way we set it out, it's really easy for them to just, again, they're quite time poor generally. So if anything's in red, they know that's what they know they need to read and take notice of. So they can just scan the document and know that X, Y, and Z still need to be confirmed by them. So that helps them plan their work as well on the event. So we've got a little exercise for you.